The evening was calm, painted with the golden light of the setting sun. Margaret sat by the living room window, watching the trees sway gently in the autumn breeze. Her small house in Vermont had always felt peaceful, but lately the quiet had grown heavier. Since her husband, Thomas, passed away, silence had become her most constant companion. Yet that night was different. Her grandson Ethan was visiting, and his presence filled the house with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan had arrived that afternoon, carrying a bag of groceries and his usual easy smile. He was 21 now, taller, broader, with that spark of thoughtfulness in his eyes that reminded her of his grandfather. He'd been in college studying business, and his visits had become rare. So when he called to say he wanted to spend the weekend with her, Margaret's heart had lifted like it hadn't in months. After dinner, the two of them settled in the living room. Margaret poured herself a cup of chamomile tea while Ethan leaned back on the couch, flipping through an old photo album he had found on the shelf. The pictures told the story of their family: birthdays, Christmases, trips to the lake. Laughter echoed in every image. Grandma, Ethan said with a faint smile, "You and Grandpa looked so happy back then. I wish I'd known him better." Margaret's eyes softened. "You were only 7 when he passed, sweetheart. But he adored you. You used to follow him everywhere." "I remember bits of it," Ethan murmured. "Mostly the smell of his cologne and how he always whistled while making pancakes." Margaret chuckled. "Yes, that was him. Always cheerful in the mornings. Drove me crazy." For a while, they sat in silence. The ticking of the old wall clock filled the room. Margaret could feel something unspoken hanging between them. Ethan kept looking at the photographs, but his expression had changed, thoughtful, almost distant. "Is everything all right, Ethan?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, just thinking. College has been a lot lately. I don't really talk to anyone about it." Margaret leaned forward, her voice kind. "You can always talk to me, dear. You know that." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's why I came, actually. I've been thinking about life. And love, I guess. You always seem to understand those things better than anyone." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Love? That's quite a topic for a Friday night." He laughed under his breath, but didn't look up. "It's been on my mind. I met someone, Grandma. But I don't know if it's love or something else. It's confusing." Her heart warmed at his honesty. "Ah, young love always is. Tell me about her." He looked at the photo album again, as if searching for courage. "She's kind, patient, and she listens. When I talk to her, I feel seen, like I don't have to pretend." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then it sounds like she means something to you." "She does," he said quietly. "But I don't know if I deserve her." Margaret frowned. "Why would you say that?" Ethan hesitated. His fingers traced the edge of an old photograph, one of Thomas holding baby Ethan. "Because I've made mistakes. I pushed people away. I don't even talk to Mom much anymore. I feel like I'm just drifting." Margaret's heart ached. She had noticed the distance between him and his mother, her daughter Sarah. Life had made them both stubborn in different ways. But seeing Ethan's eyes dim like that broke something inside her, sweetheart. She said gently, "You're young and life is messy. But that doesn't make you undeserving of love. Everyone makes mistakes, even me." Ethan finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "Did you ever doubt it, Grandma? With Grandpa, I mean, did you ever wonder if it was real?" Margaret froze for a moment. The question came so suddenly, so deeply, that it stirred memories she hadn't visited in years. She thought of the day she met Thomas, the way he had smiled as if the whole world was brighter just for her. She remembered the fights, the tears, and the laughter that always followed. "Of course I did," she admitted softly. "There were times I questioned everything. But love isn't about being certain all the time. It's about choosing someone even when you're unsure." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "That's the thing. I don't know if I can choose. I feel lost, like I don't even know who I am yet." Margaret set her cup down and moved to sit beside him. You don't have to have all the answers, Ethan. You're still finding your place in the world. Love doesn't demand perfection. It only asks for honesty. He smiled faintly, but said nothing. The air grew still between them, heavy with something unspoken. Margaret sensed that his visit wasn't just about catching up. He was carrying a weight, one that went deeper than college worries or heartbreak. The rain began to fall outside, soft and rhythmic against the window. It filled the silence, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan broke it with a question that stopped Margaret's heart cold. "Grandma," he said quietly, "how did you know when it was time to let go of someone you loved?" Margaret blinked, startled. "Let go." He nodded slowly. "When you realized holding on was hurting more than helping?" Her breath caught. That was not a question from a young man just confused about love. That was a question from someone in pain. "I suppose," she began softly, "you let go when love stops being kind. When it becomes something that breaks you instead of builds you." "But why do you ask that, Ethan?" He looked down at his hands again. "Because I think I might be at that point. And I don't know what to do." Margaret's chest tightened. She wanted to ask more, but she could see he wasn't ready. His voice trembled slightly, and his eyes looked far away, as if seeing something painful. "Then don't decide tonight," she said finally. "Sometimes the heart just needs time to breathe before it knows what to do." He nodded, grateful for the out. The moment eased slightly, though a shadow still lingered in his expression. When it was time for bed, Ethan hugged her tighter than usual. "Thanks for listening, Grandma," he said softly. "Always," she whispered back. Kissing his cheek as he went upstairs, she stayed in the living room a while longer. The rain had stopped, but her thoughts kept swirling. Ethan's questions echoed in her mind, stirring old emotions she thought she had long buried. She walked to the mantel and picked up a framed photo of Thomas. Running her fingers over the glass, "You'd know what to say," she murmured. But she was alone now, and her grandson was struggling with something he couldn't yet name. When she finally went to bed, she couldn't sleep. She replayed every word he said, every pause, every look. Something about the way he'd asked those questions. It wasn't just about a girl. It was about himself, about who he was becoming, and what he feared losing. Margaret lay awake for hours, her mind full of worry and love. She knew tomorrow would bring more truth and maybe more pain, but she was ready. She had lived long enough to know that sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that heal the deepest wounds. And as the clock struck midnight, she whispered into the dark, "Whatever it is, Ethan, we'll face it together." Ah! But she couldn't have known then his next question would shake her even more than the first. The next morning arrived quietly. A pale winter sun filtered through the lace curtains of Margaret's kitchen. The smell of brewed coffee filled the air as she stood by the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal. She could hear the faint creak of footsteps upstairs. Ethan was awake. Her heart lifted slightly. Last night had left her restless, but she told herself not to pry too soon. He would talk when he was ready. When Ethan came down, his hair messy and eyes tired, Margaret greeted him with a warm smile. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep all right?" He nodded, sliding into a chair. "Yeah, kind of. Kinda means no," she said softly, setting a bowl in front of him. "Eat. You'll feel better after breakfast." He smiled faintly, grateful for her calmness. For a few minutes they ate in silence, only the sound of spoons and the ticking wall clock between them. Margaret watched him quietly, the way he seemed distracted, his gaze lost somewhere far beyond the kitchen walls. Finally, she said, "Ethan, you don't have to tell me what's on your mind if you're not ready. But I want you to know I'm here always." He nodded slowly. "I know, Grandma. That's why I came here." Margaret waited, not pushing. She'd learned over the years that silence could open doors words never could. After a long pause, Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you're doing everything right, but it still feels wrong somehow?" She looked at him carefully. "Yes, many times." He looked up, surprised. "Really?" Margaret smiled gently. "Of course. When I was your age, I did what everyone expected. Married young, had a child, worked hard, smiled when I didn't want to. It took me years to realize I wasn't living for myself." Ethan leaned back, studying her face as if hearing this for the first time. "So what did you do?" "I learned to listen to the quiet inside me," she said. "It tells you the truth if you let it." He sighed deeply. "That's the problem, Grandma. I don't know what's true anymore." Something in his tone made her heart tighten. He wasn't just confused, he was hurting. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Then start with what hurts the most. What's making you feel lost?" He hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly. "It's complicated." Margaret smiled gently. "Complicated just means important." Ethan exhaled shakily, his shoulders tense. "All right. I guess it started last year. I met someone on campus, her name's Lily. She was different. Smart, honest, kind. She made me feel like I could be myself." Margaret nodded, encouraging him. "She sounds lovely," Swersey said softly. "But the problem wasn't her. It was me. I wasn't being honest about who I was." Margaret frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He looked down, his voice low. "I kept pretending to be what everyone thought I should be. Confident, focused, normal. But inside, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I couldn't talk to Mom. She'd just tell me to toughen up. Dad wouldn't understand either. So I started hiding more and more until it became unbearable." Margaret's chest ached. She could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of years spent bottling things up. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered. "You've been carrying this alone." He nodded. "Yeah. And then one night I told Lily the truth, that I didn't know who I really was, what I wanted, or even who I wanted to be. I thought she'd leave, but she didn't. She said she'd wait. But after that, I pulled away. I didn't want to hurt her." Margaret listened quietly, her heart full. This wasn't about rebellion or confusion. It was about identity, fear, and the struggle to belong. "So you left her?" she asked softly. He nodded again. "Yeah, I told her I needed space. But it's been months now, and I still feel stuck. I came here because I thought maybe you'd understand." Margaret squeezed his hand gently. "I do, Ethan, more than you think." He looked up, confused. "You do?" She nodded slowly, her eyes misty. "When your grandfather passed, I felt like half of me disappeared. I didn't know who I was without him. For years, I lived for everyone else, for your mother, for this house, for appearances. It took me a long time to realize I had the right to rediscover myself, even at 60. Ethan's eyes softened. "I never knew that." Margaret smiled sadly. "We don't always share the messy parts of our stories. But maybe we should." They sat there for a while, the quiet between them gentle now, not heavy. The morning light fell across the table, illuminating the lines on her face, not as marks of age, but of survival. Ethan finally spoke again, his voice steadier. "Sometimes I feel guilty for feeling lost. I have a good life, a good family, but it still feels like something's missing." "That's not guilt, sweetheart," Margaret said softly. "That's your soul asking for truth. It's part of growing up, realizing what the world told you to be might not be who you are." Ethan nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. For the first time in months, he felt understood. They spent the rest of the day walking through the small garden behind the house. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Margaret showed him the rose bush Thomas had planted years ago. He used to say love was like these flowers. It takes patience to bloom, she said with a faint smile. Ethan looked at the petals, deep red and fading at the edges. "Did you ever think of leaving, Grandma? When you were younger?" Margaret paused, then laughed softly. "Oh, many times. There were nights I wanted to pack a bag and drive away. But love kept me here. Not just love for your grandfather, but for the life we built. Sometimes staying takes more courage than leaving." He looked at her thoughtfully. "And sometimes leaving takes courage too, doesn't it?" She nodded. "It does. The trick is knowing which one your heart is asking for." As they walked back to the house, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of church bells from down the valley. Margaret watched her grandson carefully. His face looked lighter, but she could still see the storm beneath the surface. That evening, he sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Ethan handed her a photo he had taken earlier, the rose bush in the sunlight. "You were right," he said softly. "Patience does make things beautiful." Margaret smiled, touched. "And honesty makes them last." Ethan stared at the fire for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Grandma, can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" Her heart fluttered. "Of course." He hesitated, searching her face. "I think I'm scared of the person I'm becoming. I'm not sure where I fit anymore. I'm not sure who I'm supposed to love or what kind of life I want. And I'm terrified of disappointing everyone." Margaret's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, listen to me. You don't have to have it all figured out. Life isn't a race, it's a journey. The people who truly love you will walk with you, even through your confusion." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "Even Mom, even her," she said gently. "She loves you deeply. She's just afraid, like most parents." "Give her time." Ethan nodded slowly, the firelight dancing across his face. "Thank you, Grandma, for not judging me." She smiled faintly. "Judgment closes hearts, Ethan. Love keeps them open." They sat there until the fire died down, the room glowing softly with the last embers of warmth. Margaret felt something shift, a quiet healing beginning to form between them. But deep inside, she also sensed that Ethan wasn't done yet. His eyes still carried that question, the one he hadn't yet found the courage to ask later that night. After she went to bed, she heard him pacing downstairs, his footsteps restless. She didn't go down, but she listened. Sometimes letting someone face their silence was the kindest thing you could do. As she drifted to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. Tomorrow, he'll tell me everything. She didn't know that what he'd reveal the next morning would shake her heart more than anything he'd said so far. The next morning, the air felt unusually still. A pale golden light spread across the curtains, and the house seemed to hum with quiet anticipation. Margaret woke early, her mind restless. She had sensed it last night, something unspoken lingering between them. Ethan's words, his hesitation, his troubled eyes, all of it had built up to something important. She brewed coffee, set the table, and waited. When Ethan finally came down, his face looked tired but determined. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tightly. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy but fragile, as though a single word could shatter it. Margaret poured him coffee and sat across from him. "You've got that look again," she said softly. "Like your heart's full of words you're scared to say." Ethan exhaled deeply. "You're right. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about what you said, about listening to the quiet inside." Margaret nodded, patient. "And what did it tell you?" He hesitated, eyes lowering. "That I need to tell you everything, even if it changes how you see me." Her voice stayed calm. "Ethan, there's nothing you could say that would make me stop loving you." He swallowed hard. "Okay, then please just listen. Don't say anything until I finish." Margaret nodded slowly. She folded her hands on the table, ready to hear whatever truth he'd been holding back. Ethan stared at his cup for a long moment before speaking. "All my life, I've tried to be the kind of person people expected me to be. Good grades, polite, normal. But the truth is, I've never felt normal. I've always felt different. Not broken, just out of place. And lately that feeling's been getting stronger." Margaret watched him carefully, her eyes soft and steady. "Different how?" He looked up, his voice trembling slightly. "I think I'm in love with someone I shouldn't be." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and uncertain. Margaret didn't move, didn't breathe. She only asked quietly, "Why do you think you shouldn't?" "Because it's complicated," Ethan said quickly. "Because people wouldn't understand. Because it doesn't fit what everyone expects of me. But it's real, Grandma. It's the first time I've felt something this deep, and I don't know what to do with it." Margaret's gaze softened even more. Love doesn't always make sense, Ethan. Sometimes it comes when you least expect it, or when the world says it shouldn't. But that doesn't make it wrong. He blinked, surprised. You're not shocked? She smiled faintly. I've lived long enough to know that hearts don't follow rules. They follow truth. So tell me, who is it? He hesitated again, then looked away. It's someone I met in my photography class. His name's Noah. Margaret's expression didn't change. She only nodded gently. Ethan looked back at her, expecting judgment, confusion, anything. But all he saw was kindness. You thought I'd be upset? She said softly. He nodded. Yeah, I was terrified. Mom and Dad wouldn't take it well. I thought maybe you'd think I was. Wrong, oh Ethan. Margaret's voice broke slightly as she reached across the table and took his hand. You're not wrong. You're just being honest, and that's one of the hardest, bravest things a person can do. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He looked down, unable to speak. For months, he had carried this fear like a secret weight, certain that telling the truth would cost him the love of his family. But here, across from his grandmother, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. After a while, he said quietly, You're the first person I've told. I didn't even tell Lily why I ended things. I just ran away from it all. But I can't keep hiding. Not anymore. Margaret squeezed his hand. Then don't. You've spent too long pretending to be someone else. The world needs more people brave enough to live their truth. He nodded, wiping his eyes. It's just hard, you know. I keep thinking about how people will react, what they'll say. They'll say what they say, she replied gently. But at the end of the day, it's your life, not theirs. They sat quietly for a while, the sound of the clock filling the room. Margaret sipped her coffee, her heart heavy but full of pride. She thought of all the years she'd spent trying to fit into expectations and how it had cost her so much joy. If Ethan could find the courage to live differently, maybe he'd be freer than she ever was. Later that day, they took a drive to the lake on the edge of town. The water shimmered under the soft afternoon light, and a cool breeze rustled the trees. Ethan walked ahead, camera in hand, snapping photos of the quiet landscape. Margaret followed slowly, watching him with quiet admiration. Do you remember when you were little? She called out. You used to take pictures of everything, even puddles. He laughed, glancing back. Yeah, you told me puddles could show a different world if I looked close enough. Margaret smiled. Seems like you're still looking for that world. He nodded. Maybe I am. They found a bench overlooking the lake and sat together. Ethan showed her one of the photos on his camera, a reflection of the sky in the still water. It looked almost like a portal to another place. It's beautiful, she said softly. Ethan smiled. I want to tell my story through pictures one day. Not just mine, but stories like mine. The kind people are too afraid to tell. Margaret's eyes glistened. You'll do it beautifully. Just promise me something, Ethan. What? Don't let fear choose for you. I let it make too many of my choices, and I regret it. You deserve better. He nodded, touched. I promise. They sat there for hours talking about life, love, and the quiet courage it takes to be yourself. The air grew cooler as evening settled in, painting the lake in shades of orange and gold. On the drive home, Margaret thought about how brave her grandson was, not just for his confession, but for daring to hope in a world that could be unkind. She knew his journey wouldn't be easy, but she also knew he wouldn't walk it alone. When they got home, Ethan went upstairs to pack. He had decided to return to college early, ready to face what came next. Margaret stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching him move around the room. There was a new lightness to him, as if the burden he'd carried had finally lifted before he left. He came to her and hugged her tightly. Thank you, Grandma, for everything. She held him close, her voice soft. You don't have to thank me, dear. Just live your truth. That's all I want, he smiled. I will. When he walked out the door, the morning sun spilled across the porch, warm and golden. Margaret stood there, watching him disappear down the road. She felt both sad and proud. Sad to see him go. Proud to know he was walking toward his own life. That night she sat by the fire with a cup of tea, staring into the flames. On the mantel was a framed photo Ethan had taken that afternoon, the reflection of the sky in the lake. She smiled softly. "A different world," she whispered. "Just like you said." For the first time in years, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in a long while. Hope. Hope for the new generation, for truth. For love that wasn't bound by fear or judgment. As the fire crackled softly, she closed her eyes, knowing she had done something right. She hadn't just been a grandmother that day, she'd been a safe place, a bridge between generations, and a quiet witness to courage. And though Ethan's question that night had left her speechless, his honesty had filled her heart in ways words never could.